A very big hello to everyone who have joined us here today for the session on preparation of US visa for Fall 21. I'm Arbaz Hashmi from Empower Financing, and it's exciting times, by the way, everyone. Embassies around the world have started to open up, and there's nervousness around the air. There's a lot of anxiety with the students too. What's going to happen? What to expect? How things have changed in the last 1 year during the pandemic, and we realized that would be a better person to talk about this entire situation and scenario than someone who has been on the other side of the window, And that's exactly who we have invited here today from Argo Visa, our very most cherished partner. We have Ben Arterburn, who has been an visa consular in his time and has interviewed, I think, more than 60,000 applicants when he was a consular officer at Mainland China and Colombia. But Ben will give you a much more detailed introduction about his experience to you guys when he'll take up. What I want to do is take you guys through a very quick, flow of the event. Exactly how would it go? So the first half of the event, which is about 20 to 30 minutes, Ben would talk a little bit about his experience, and give you a brief overview of how do the interviews actually go about. Maybe even introduce this cohort of services that Ben and his colleagues actually offer to aspiring students. And for the rest of the event, this would be like the next half an hour, we would be taking up questions. But please feel free to start adding questions to the questions tab as Ben start talking about his experience and the presentation. I know that you would have a lot more of them, and don't wait for the questions round to begin. Just keep adding them, and while the questions round begin, I will start picking one by one, and Ben will answer the questions hopefully.
Okay, great. Let me just introduce Argo to you first, the company that I'm speaking to you from. Argo is the first company of its kind in the entire world. We're a company made up of former visa officers. We used to be the diplomats, the consular officers that were working on the other side of the window when you would go and apply for your visa. So all of us have done more than 10,000 visa interviews. Like Arbaz said, I've done over 60,000. Mandy, one of our other founders, has done over 100,000 interviews. So you can imagine we've got a surplus of experience doing these visa interviews. We know the regulations inside and out. But more important than that, we know what's going on inside the head of a visa officer when you go for your visa interview. So today we're going to go over 10 things that you should know about the F-1 and J-1 visa interview process, since I know that's what most of you are going to be facing here in the coming days or months. Like I said, my name is Ben Arterburn. I'll tell you a little bit about my career with the State Department as a visa officer and diplomat. I started out in Guangzhou, China. I have a background in Chinese studies and speaking Chinese, and so I was assigned there to Guangzhou, where I did all the types of visas that you can possibly imagine in the world. B1, B2, tourist business visas, F1 student visas, J1 exchange visas, L1, H1B, E2, EB3, EB5, immigrant visas, O1s, aliens of extraordinary ability, basically anything you can imagine, I did there. I was in all the units that we have there, immigrant visas, non-immigrant visas, and got a plethora of experience while I was working in Guangzhou. After that, I worked in Bogota, Colombia, for 2 years again, getting more experience in visas there. I was actually part of the fraud unit, where we do the investigations into people that are committing visa fraud. So I know, intimately how that process works, what they're looking at, what can cause a problem, and what can cause a hiccup in your visa application process. My last job with the State Department before I left the government and joined with Argo was as the spokesperson and press secretary at the U.S. consulate in Shanghai, China. So you can tell I've got a deep background in China. But the good thing is that our company has officers who have served all over the world. And also, as officers in the government, you can see I was in China and then in Colombia. They move us around everywhere. What that means is that no one spends more than 2 to 3 years in any location, then they're moved to a different place. That means that we've all got broad experience all over the world, but also that all over the world, people are taking their experience and it standardizes the way that things are done, the thinking around visa applications. So really, it's kind of a generalized criteria around the entire world for people applying for their visas. So about the visa interview process, everybody knows going into this that there's a lot of misinformation about it. There's a lot of people out there telling you this, telling you that. It's hard to know what to trust. And understandably, many visa applicants are nervous. They don't know what's going to happen. Everyone knows a friend or an acquaintance who has gone for their visa interview and they've been refused. And no one knows why. And it's really unfortunate. And that can also be a source of stress in that process. What we're here to do is help you understand what might have caused those refusals and help you avoid what may have been a mistake or a misunderstanding on their part that caused that refusal. Those mistakes and misunderstandings could be language-based. You know, a lot of you are in countries where the language is not English, the primary language, and so the officers may speak some of the local language. Some may be fluent. Others may not be so fluent. And so there could be a language barrier. Even if your English is great, it could be the words that you're using are not the words that they're used to, or they have a different context when you're using them in English. And so we can help you with that as well. Cultural misunderstandings, also people who are doing these visa interviews may have just arrived in country and are not so familiar with how institutions and cultural norms work in your country, which can cause a misunderstanding, which could lead to a visa refusal. An important point that we're going to go over and over during this presentation is that documents will not get you the visa. The documents are secondary evidence. You need your documents. However, the primary criteria that the visa officer will use to decide to give you the visa or not is his or her conversation with you. It's that conversation that's going to guide them in terms of which documents they might want to ask for. Maybe they won't ask for any documents. That would actually be the preferable way that the interview goes. So we're going to prepare you for that. And to let you know a little bit about what's going on inside the consular officers' minds as they're working, as they're conducting that interview. The consular officers are under extreme pressure to do as many visas as they possibly can. Many people expect that they'll be able to go in there and tell their entire story, explain everything about their situation, their studies, their plans for the future, but the consular officer is going to cut them off. The visa officer is going to say, no, listen, I need to know this. I need to know that. Let's move on. And people only get 1, 2, maybe 3 minutes. If it goes beyond that, you might have more of a chance to explain yourself, but it means that they're not very certain. So you need to really focus on getting your information to the consular officer as fast as possible, as efficiently as possible, so that they know why you're a good visa applicant. And this visa interview, it's high stakes. You get one shot at that first interview. That's your best shot. And whatever they decide right there on that day, after 1 to 2 minutes of talking to you, that's the final decision for that day. It can't be overturned. It can't be overturned by anyone. They are fully empowered to make whatever decision they feel is correct right there in the moment, and then it's not going to be overturned. You can apply again, of course, and you can be issued when you apply again. And we'll talk about the ways that you can do that. However, it's harder. You've got a clean slate when you start. If you got one refusal, that's one strike against you, and so it's going to make it harder the next time. But there are ways to get over that. So just going over some visa numbers, this is from 2018. Since the last year and a half, visa numbers have not been normal. We've been shut down all over the world. So the numbers are growing now, mostly just emergency appointments, expedited appointments, student visa appointments. But in 2018, the visa numbers were 363,000 student visas issued worldwide. Nearly 200,000 of those were rejected. It's quite a high percentage. And 68,000 of those had pending issues. What we mean by that is administrative processing. What you all may be familiar with is 221G when they do a check, right? That can sometimes just be administrative. Sometimes it means that they're not sure about your case and they're going to investigate the information that you've provided to them. Student visas, on average worldwide, get refused at a rate of 35%. All right. This is not to scare you, but to let you be realistic about the hurdle that you have to overcome in this visa interview. You don't want to be one of those 35%. Many of those shouldn't be refused. And if they approached the interview in a different way, maybe they wouldn't have been refused. And that's why a lot of us in our previous roles with the government, we thought that it was so unfortunate that so many students got refused when they didn't need to be. And that's why we wanted to start this company and to help students avoid that unnecessary and traumatizing experience of being refused. A trend in the world since 2015, the number of U.S. student visas issued worldwide has been going down. Now, a lot of that has to do with more strict refusal rates because of the previous presidential administration's policies, which were tougher on immigrants and all types of visas. So it's just something to be aware of. The numbers have been going down, which means that it's not as easy as it was, we'll say 8-9 years ago. And you got to be ready. You have to be very well prepared going into this interview. You shouldn't take it lightly. Now, let's get to the meat of this presentation, the 10 things that you didn't know about the F-1 and J-1 visa interview process. And please, like Arbaz said, submit your questions as we go along, because afterwards we're going to have a Q&A. And I know that for a lot of you, that's going to be the most important part, because you've got your own situation that's very specific, and we're going to get to those questions at the end. This is some general information that's going to, give you a kind of an overview that can guide you through your thinking about the visa process. So number 10, consular officers are not attorneys. They are not attorneys, and so an attorney can't help you when dealing with a consular officer. The consular officers are beyond scrutiny by attorneys in the U.S. No lawsuits, no legal action can be brought against their decisions. They're made abroad, and they are final. What that also means, though, is that the consular officers are not extreme experts on visas. Now, that may come as a shock to you, but I'll tell you what the situation is, that many of them, they join the State Department as diplomats. They're intending to be diplomats, interacting with government officials, business leaders, engaging in international diplomacy. Now, they're assigned to do visas as the entry-level job before they move on to this other work. Some of them are not very interested in doing it. Most of them have been undertrained in terms of their knowledge of all the laws and regulations, what's allowable, what's not allowable, the language of the country where they're serving, the customs, the institutions of that country, which kind of determine how you would interpret someone's situation there when they present themselves for an interview. So they don't know everything. You can't rely on them to know everything, despite doing lots of research on what's allowed, what's allowable, what the regulations say. You're going to encounter some visa officers that might not know all of that, right? And so we can help you navigate that situation, because really it is a lot of what their feelings are. They're feeling, they're thinking, how their office works, the culture in their office, which is going to affect how they make their decision. And their decisions are final. Whatever they decide there that day, that's it. They cannot be reviewed. They cannot be overturned. Their bosses can tell them, hey, I don't think that you should have made this decision or not, but that's the decision and it's done. I have my commission that was issued by the president, which gives me that authority. Any consular officer has that commission, which gives them the full authority to make that decision. Writing letters afterwards, appealing to their managers or supervisors will not help. It really is you and that consular officer, that visa officer, with that glass window in between you. That interaction is the full extent of what's going to shape their opinion about your case. Here's just a tip for if you do get your visa, when you do get your visa, let's be optimistic about it. When you get to the US, don't get in trouble. What I mean by that is the consular officers are very sensitive to any type of interactions you might have with law enforcement in the US. So if you get to the US, drive under the speed limit, don't get any infractions, things like that, because that could cause them to revoke your visa or cause you problems when you go to reapply for your visa later on. Refusals are difficult to overcome. However, they are not impossible to overcome. When the visa officer opens your case, it's a blank slate. They don't know anything about you, right? So they're thinking, okay, I'm looking for some information that tells me to issue this person or to refuse this person, right? You're coming in neutral. If you've been refused previously, they open your case, and the first thing that they're going to see is this person has been refused. All right. So then the very first thought in their head is something negative. then you've got the onus, the burden, the responsibility is yours to turn their mind around from something negative to positive. Now, that's harder than starting from neutral and moving to positive, right? That's why we urge people to work with us before their first visa interview, because we can avoid that first refusal, right? We can also help you after you've been refused. It's harder, and we'll be very frank with you, very honest with you about your chances. Some people have been refused 5, 6 times. We can help. Sometimes there's one specific piece of information that was missing. Sometimes there's not. Sometimes there's very little we can do, and we'll let you know exactly what your chances are, what your path forward is, what you can do, what you can't do. But we do want to let you know refusals are difficult to overcome. So we do urge you to work with us beforehand so that you don't get one of those refusals that's going to make it more difficult in the future. So 214B, you may have heard this term or seen it when you're looking around doing your research about the visa interview. 214B basically is what a visa officer is going to use to refuse visas that they don't want to issue. What it says is that everyone who applies for a visa is assumed to be an intending immigrant, meaning that they're not going to leave the U.S. after they go to the U.S. Unless they prove to the consular officer's satisfaction that they are not an intending immigrant. So what that means is guilty until proven innocent. And I know that's counter to everything you may have heard about, the U.S. judicial system and probably the judicial systems in your own country, the standard of which is that you are innocent until they can prove that you're guilty. However, this is not the way this works with immigration. The responsibility is on you to convince them, right? Now, sometimes it may be that they think, okay, I've got reason to believe that this applicant is going to immigrate to the U.S. and not return to their country after their studies. That's not the only way that they use 214B. They'll refuse you under 214B just if they don't understand your situation. They've got 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and they're going to try to understand everything about your situation so that they feel comfortable enough, confident enough that they are not going to issue your visa and then you're going to stay in the US and misuse it, right? That's what they're trying to avoid. So a lot of times it's not that they've got some information that tells them that you're going to misuse the visa. It's just that they just don't know. They don't know about your situation. You've told them things that they don't understand. They don't know what these words mean. And then they're going to refuse you because they're just uncertain. So a lot of times uncertainty is one of the big reasons why the consular officers will refuse your visa. Number 5, administrative processing. This may be another term that you've heard in your research about the visa interview process. Administrative processing is also known as 221G. They may give you a sheet that says 221G on it. That just means, in general, they did not make a decision right then at the interview, and they're going to make a decision later. That doesn't mean you've been refused permanently. It doesn't mean necessarily anything good or bad. It just means that they haven't made the decision right then. Now, what that could mean is that you didn't bring the I-20 form, right? Or your I-20 form, the start date was wrong, so they have to change that. Or your SEVIS fee wasn't paid, so you have to pay the SEVIS fee before they'll issue the visa. In which case, it's just a matter of presenting that information, and then they'll issue the visa. Other times, it's a check, which when we talk about a check, there's really nothing you can do to avoid it, do anything right or wrong with it. It's just, they, under the regulations, some people with certain majors in certain countries have to have a check, and they're going to do it. There's nothing you can do to change whether they do it or not. So the best thing is just be prepared. Whatever documents they've asked you to bring, and we'll go over those, you need to bring all of that to make sure that it happens as fast as possible. That's really all you can do when they do a check, is just make sure that they have all the documents so it gets done as soon as they can. Your visa record is for life. This means that whatever happens in your visa interview today, that's going to stay in the system, and it's going to be associated with you next year, the year after, 10 years from now. They're always going to see that. That the same is true for anything that you did applying for a visa 10 years ago. And so you have to be aware that, when you apply in one location, if you apply in Abuja and then you get refused and you want to go to Lagos to apply, they're going to see what happened in Abuja, right? You can't start fresh by changing locations. In fact, in most situations, we would not recommend that you change to a different location, a different consulate to apply for your visa. They consider that what we call visa shopping. Like you've gone to your father and asked, can I have some chocolate? And your father says no. And so you immediately go to your mother and say, hey, can I have some chocolate? Right? They don't like that behavior. There are some specific situations where we do recommend changing the location, but that's gonna depend on your independent circumstances. And that's, when you come to us, we're going to figure out what those are and figure out how's the best way to approach your case. For student interviews, a lot of students ask us about doing their interview in English or in their native language, because they're told by the consulate, yeah, you can do your interview in whatever language you want. Now, we're here to tell you the truth about that. If you can't speak English well, even if you're going for English language studies, they're not going to look on that very favorably, right? They want someone who's speaking English. And I'll tell you what the thinking is on that. Someone who speaks English well has obviously been studying in order to get their English to that high level. Now, someone who's been studying has already proven that they are a good student, they're studious. So when they go to America, they're probably also going to be a good student, right? Someone whose English isn't good, well, the consular officer has no evidence to show that they've actually been studying very well beforehand, right? So they're just going to have to guess, well, I hope this person studies well when they get to the US. So I know when you go to the interview, it's nerve-wracking, you're nervous, you're anxious, it's hard to speak English the best that you know that you can speak it, but you do want to work on it. You need to practice your English, you need to improve your English. Don't memorize your answers. You want to have a natural conversation with the visa officer, but it is important that you try to do it in English if you can. All right, number 2, documents are not important. Well, we've got an asterisk there because there are documents that you do need to have. Like I said before, documents are secondary. They're going to make their decision based on what they see in your DS-160 and the answers you give them when they ask you questions during the interview, right? That's the primary information that they're going to be using to make their decision. Now, if there's something that gives them pause or that they don't understand or that they doubt, maybe they're going to ask you, let me see that invitation letter. Let me see that house, that property deed that you said you had. Let me see that bank statement. Let me see your transcripts, right? You need to bring all of these to your interview. You need to bring them all so that you can be prepared to answer whatever questions they have, give them whatever information, whatever documents that they're asking for. But the primary thing that you need to prepare for are the questions they're going to ask you and how you're going to answer them. Some of those other documents you definitely need as a student. Your passport, of course, that goes without saying. Your DS-160 confirmation page, which is what's going to get you into your interview. Recent photo with it taken within the last 6 months, and your I-20 form. That's going to be included in any instructions that you have from the consulate or embassy. Just make sure you have all of that so you don't get delayed. Lastly, how you present yourself is crucial. I think I've said this quite a number of times, but I'm going to say it again because it's worth repeating. You have about 30 seconds at the beginning of the interview to really influence the visa officer's thinking. Those 30 seconds are what's going to tell him whether to issue or refuse your visa, right? They're people just like anybody else, and everything about the visa interview process is going to affect their decision. The DS-160, the way that you filled that out, that's going to be one of the first things they see. When you walk up, the first thing that you say to them, right, is going to affect their thinking. The way you look, the way you dress, the way, your confidence during the interview, all of this is going to affect it. Now, the confidence, I know everyone's different. That's hard to control, but you definitely can control how you look, how you fill out your DS-160, and how you prepare to answer their questions, right? In terms of how you look, some people, they'll tell you, oh, you got to wear a suit to the interview. Well, if you're a business person, wear a suit to the interview, right? If that's what you're wearing every day, that's definitely what you should wear. If you're a 19-year-old college student, and you wear a suit and it's for the first time, it's got creases in it because it's the first time you've ever worn it and you just pulled it out of the packaging and put it on, it's going to look unnatural. And it's going to look like, okay, you're playing a role. right? You put on a costume to play this role. So you just have to dress in a way that that fits the narrative of who you are, right? And that's going to establish trust and confidence with the consular officer. And that's what you need really to be able to get your visa issued, is that they trust you and they feel confident issuing your visa. Okay, like I told you, our company is called Argo. We're in a network of former visa officers who all worked as diplomats and consular officers in U.S. embassies and consulates all over the world. And what we do is we connect applicants like you who are applying for their student visas through our platform to our former consular officers for a consultation. And our former consular officers will take the time to understand your situation. The visa officers in your real visa interview, they might spend 2 minutes with you. We're going to spend 30 minutes or an hour with you. We're going to ask every possible question that they might ask you, right? We're going to find out everything about your situation, everything about your circumstances, your studies, your finances. We're going to see what's the good information that you could present to them, and what are the things that might give them, some concerns or some doubts, right? And we're going to help you strategize when you go into your interview and they ask you a question. For instance, what are you going to study, right? And you say engineering, business, physics, right? Well, anytime they ask you that question, or any question, anytime they ask you anything and they give you an opportunity to answer, they're saying, tell me why I should issue you the visa. And that's how you should interpret it, right? We know what's the good information that's going to help them get to an issuance rather than a refusal. So we can guide you and help you come up with these are the answers that you need to steer them toward in the interview. That's really going to influence their thinking towards issuing and not towards refusing. Our officers come from, everyone's a U.S. citizen, of course, but we've served all over the world. This is a smattering of the places where we've served all over the world. You may or may not see your country on here. In fact, this is an older map, and I'm not a graphic designer, so I wasn't able to update this. But we also have people from Colombia, like myself, who have served in Nigeria. We have people who have served in Germany, the UK, Estonia. Other countries even that aren't even on this map, Ecuador as well. So, our network is always growing, and we have people that have served in all these countries where you may be applying from and speak your language too. 25 of us currently speaking 14 languages, Spanish, Portuguese, French, German, Hindi, Gujarati, Mandarin Chinese, Cantonese, Bahasa Indonesia, quite a few languages. That covers most of the world. So whatever your language is, there's a good chance we have an officer that speaks it and has served in your country. 34 countries is where we have experience doing visa applications. And all 25 of us combined have made decisions on over 1 million visa applications. So that is quite a broad base of experience. Whatever your personal circumstances are, and you think, okay, well, I know that you've said this and you've said that, but here's my story, here's my situation, here's my problem. We've seen it, right? We've done 1 million of these. We've seen every possible iteration of circumstances, of problems, of stories, of denials, of finances, of academic plans, and we know how to best present that. So I wanted to get through the presentation portion of this pretty quickly so we can move on to Q&As. Arbaz, are we ready for that?
Oh yes, there have been so many questions in the background while you were, telling us about the visa.
Should I stop showing my screen here, or should I leave the screen up like this?
The screen is fine. No worries about that. So, there are so many of them. So I have definitely chosen some of them that maybe we can talk about. Does it affect someone's situation if the sponsor is living in the US?
So sponsors are interesting. It depends on what kind of sponsor this is, right? So many times, if your sponsor is your parent, is your mother or father, then that's normal. Most students aren't able to fund their studies all by themselves, even though some are. So if that's who the sponsor is, then that's fine. If it's a close family member, then that's also, we take that into account as well, even though that's not as reliable as the parent. And then if it's a stranger, well, that sponsorship, honestly, it's not necessarily a good piece of information or a bad one. It's basically kind of, okay, well, there's a sponsor who's not related to this person, who's either in the home country or in the US, that's funding them for whatever reason. But then the student is really going to have to prove on their own why they're going to be a good student, right? So if you're an excellent student and you're going to, let's say, Harvard on the high end of things, and there's a sponsor who's willing to sponsor you, and it's a family friend or an uncle, or let's say that there's a scholarship organization that's doing this, then that's going to be great. If you've got a sponsor who's not closely related to you, and you're going to a college that might not have as strict of an admission standard, let's say a lesser known state school or a junior college or community college, then it's going to be harder, and we're going to have to find other things, because that talking about that sponsor is not going to reassure the officer about your legitimacy as a student. You're going to have to find other ways to convince them and not focus on the sponsor.
Understood. Got it. And a follow-up question on that: if a student has multiple sponsors, is there like a thumb rule to which one to use, or especially in the DS 160?
No, there's no rule of thumb, but I would say, in general, if it's a family member, a mother or father, that's best. That's best, because that's the most standard situation. I talked about confusing the consular officers being a way that, if they don't understand what's going on, then they'll refuse it. If you say, my father's paying for my studies, they're going to say, okay, that sounds absolutely natural to them. And they wouldn't question why that is at all. But if you say, oh, there's this person who my dad knows from college who lives in the US, and he's going to pay for my studies, then that raises a whole bunch of issues. Why would this person pay for you? You're not their child. Why are they going to pay for you? Do you have to repay them? Is it just charity? So, making them ask more questions is always not ideal. You want to give them answers that completely answer every question that they've got. So if they ask, who's your sponsor? And you just say, this man in America, this organization in America, without an explanation, you're going to leave them with more questions. So a good answer is going to tell them who it is and also why, and wrap it up very nicely so that they can understand it all at once.
Understood. Got it. And I think I know the answer to this question, but I would love for you to, I think maybe just confirm that if there is an F-1 visa refusal, how soon can an applicant reapply and reschedule the visa interview?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's no limit on that. If there's a visa appointment available the very next day, well, you could go the very next day. There's no limit on that at all. And there's no limit on the number of times you can apply. Now, that's just in terms of technically how many times can you do it. Now, I would say in practice, you don't want to apply 10 times in a row and get refused. If you've applied, there's no hard limit on this, and we would look at each situation differently. 6 times in the last month, and you've been refused every time, and there's no way that we can change it, and there's no misunderstanding, then probably it's going to be hard, right? We'd have to see, what are the circumstances? Is there a piece of information that was left out that we can really bring to the forefront? But it's going to be hard. And in terms of the link between them, if you apply 3 days later, or if you apply 2 weeks later, or a month later, it's not really any different. Those are both considered very recent refusals. So there's no reason to wait a month instead of a week. In fact, if you're applying for an F-1 visa for this fall, then apply as soon as you can get the interview. If you've already been refused, because they don't care if you've waited a month since your last interview or a week. They're going to see, oh, it's the same purpose of travel to the US for a student. They're going to consider it the exact same way.
Understood. And I know we discussed previous refusals. There is a question about, can proper documentation assist, or rather help in overcoming these refusals when you're reapplying? Or is it a much more complex scenario?
Yes, it can. It can help. Many times people will be refused because, they present something complex at their interview. The officer can't understand it. They don't know what's going on with it. And then you're going to get refused. So when you go back, you definitely want to have, well-organized, clearly presented documents that are going to prove it, but that doesn't guarantee they're going to look at it, right? You're going to need to find a way to lead the officer into wanting to see that, right? And it really is coming up with, 1-2 sentences that's going to grab their attention and make them decide, okay, yes, it's worth my time to look at these documents. But documents definitely can play a role in overturning those decisions. Many times when you've been refused once, when you go back in for your interview, they're going to ask you a question. What's changed since your last interview? I'm sure that people have heard this question or heard people talk about this question. Well, what's different since your last interview? The reason they ask that is because they've been told by their managers, hey, if nothing's changed since they were interviewed a week ago, then you should probably refuse them again. And that's because the managers are interested in people doing as many interviews as possible, as quickly as possible. They want people to go through them quickly. They don't want people to spend 10 minutes reviewing documents. And so they think, okay, well, one person's already made a decision. You should probably make the same decision. But if you have new information, if something has changed, then they're supposed to give you another look. Now, I know that for most people, no, nothing has changed from last week to this week, right? It's the exact same situation. The information, the data in your application, it's all the exact same. But maybe you didn't get to present that to the officer before, right? Maybe they didn't understand it. So when they give you the opportunity to answer that question, what's changed since the last time? You really don't want to say nothing, because that just gives them full license to refuse your visa right there. You need to say something has changed. Now, maybe it's the tiniest thing. Maybe it's, oh, well, now I've got my documentation. Anything like that. We work with people on how to answer that question. That's one of the big things that we work with people on, because they could decide right there with your answer that they're not going to issue your visa. So that's one of those key questions that you need to come up with a good answer for.
Understood. And how much of a red flag would it be if someone on a previous B1, B2 visa overstayed on their visit?
Well, usually that's going to be a red flag. It's going to definitely be something that the consular officers are going to take into account, and you'll have to have an explanation for it. With COVID, many people weren't able to leave, and they are taking that into account. They're not harshly penalizing people for overstays during COVID. They're being reasonable in our experience. They also, though, they have to understand why there was a problem, why there was a reason why you overstayed, right? And Americans appreciate when people admit that they've done something wrong. And so people can also get their visa by admitting, yes, I overstayed because I didn't know something, or because I made a bad decision. I thought this was going to happen, but it didn't happen, and I know that I wasn't supposed to stay that long, and I apologize. Many times that's the way to go, because Americans do, they don't look kindly on people refusing to admit that they did something wrong. So sometimes that's the way that we recommend people approach it.
Understood. And there has always been a huge confusion and no clear information about this particular rumor, maybe we can call it, that a person should always apply for a particular consulate in a country, because this particular consulate has been known to issue maximum approvals. Is that also a case, or is it just rumors?
Usually that's going to be rumors. And then, somebody may have personally gone to that consulate and they got issued. And so they say, oh, no, it's true. They'll actually do it at this consulate rather than that other consulate. But that's rumors. And the reason is that I'll give you an example from my experience in China. Shanghai had the lowest refusal rate, and Guangzhou had a higher refusal rate. But if somebody who's from around Guangzhou goes to Shanghai to apply for their visa because they hear, oh, Shanghai has a lower refusal rate, so if I go there, I've got a better chance. Well, in Shanghai, they look at, this is a person from Guangzhou. Why didn't they apply in Guangzhou? All of a sudden, there's something they don't understand. They see, you should have been in Guangzhou. Why did you come here? And now they're already suspicious of your motives. Like, are you just coming here because you think you'll have a better chance? So while one place may have a higher issuance rate, it's only higher for the people that are supposed to be going there, that they're used to seeing, right? For instance, let's say, China has a higher issuance rate than, let's say, Vietnam. So if a Vietnamese person goes to China, they might think, oh, I'll get issued there. But then in China, they don't know anything about Vietnam. They don't speak Vietnamese. They don't understand the circumstances there. So while that person might have gotten issued in Vietnam, once they arrive in China, they've got a lower chance. What we call that is a third country national, TCN. I don't know if you've heard this term or seen it on somewhere online. If you are a third country national, when you're applying, you have a higher bar that you're going to have to overcome to get issued your visa. Now, during the times of COVID, it's inevitable that some people have to apply in other jurisdictions. I had a client who was from Uzbekistan, but Uzbekistan hasn't opened any emergency appointments. So he was trying to get an emergency appointment in Kazakhstan. And I told him, it's not ideal. You could get refused there because they see, okay, you're Uzbek, I don't know anything about your country, and it makes it harder to get your visa when you're not applying in the place where they're used to seeing people apply from where you're from.
Understood. And we discussed about refusals, and there are particular questions about situations where people have been rejected for different visas, but now they want to apply for an F-1. And because this would entail different situations, because what the case was presented during a previous visa, like a previous interviews, now this would be changed. How does Argo help, or how can Argo help in these situations?
Yeah, those situations, if you switch visa class, they're still going to see the same information when you apply, right? If you were refused for a B1, B2, and now you're applying for an F, 100% of the time, the officer is going to see that refusal, and they're going to go and they're going to look, why were you refused for a B1, B2? The standard for B1, B2, and F is the same, of overcoming 214B. You have to satisfy them that you're going to go to the US and you're not going to just stay there forever, right? Now with the F, you're presenting a little bit different information, right? You're presenting the fact that you've been accepted into a university, right? Now, being able to pay for the university, everything like that, bank statements, they consider that something that's easily fabricated. So that's not what they put their trust in. But if you've been accepted to a university that has high admissions criteria, you have to pass. You have to have, your degree and good grades. You have to submit essays to them. You have to take standardized tests. Then they're going to see, okay, well, this person has already satisfied the criteria of the University of Michigan, the University of North Carolina, the Harvard University, in some people's cases. And so they're going to think, okay, they've already shown that they have all of these credentials and all this experience as a student in order to get in these universities. So I trust that this person is most likely a legitimate student who's going to go to the US and study. So if you've been refused B1, B2, and then you're going to apply for an F, you've got a little bit of an advantage because you're going to have some more information to present to them to show that you're legitimate, your credentials are real, and you've already been accepted to a university in the US.
Got it. So I think what I gathered from this answer was that, hey, universities play a role in, at least in however small that might be, but they do play a role in your situation when you're visiting for an F1 visa. And does a degree program versus a non-degree program have an effect on any of the interviews?
Yes. So all of the programs that you can apply for, they're going to look at the name of the university or the college, and it's going to influence their decision. Right. And the reason why is because, like I said, the credentials that you have to get into that university tells them how legitimate of a student you have been up until that point. Right. So if you've gotten into Stanford, University of Southern California, they're going to know that you've studied very hard. That's what you've been dedicating your time to in your home country. But if you get into, West Kentucky Technical and Vocational College, which is near my hometown, well, you don't have to present a lot of test scores or transcripts. If you apply and you say that you're a high school graduate, they're probably going to accept you. So it's much easier to get into that school. So that consular officers aren't going to take that as big of a piece of evidence that you're a legitimate student. So you're going to need to prove it to them in other ways, right?
Got it. So there could be a situation when a parent of a student had been rejected for their visa, maybe some time back, and now the student is going for their own interview, does the parents' rejection have a role to play in their decision?
Usually not. I'll say usually because it could, if they were rejected because of just a standard rejection, like they weren't comfortable and they rejected them, then no, it shouldn't. If the parents do have US visas, it can help 100%. That can help. Because if they see that the parents had US visas and they traveled to the US and they returned to their country, then they're going to trust that you'll do the same thing. If your parents have been refused, though, with no fraud or anything like that, no suspicions that they were lying, then it shouldn't affect your application. Obviously, every situation is different, but usually, I wouldn't give up just because your parents have been refused.
Got it. And so there definitely have been situations where, I've definitely read about the situations that, these officers have asked students about their test scores at times. Have you taken these tests? Have you taken GRE, GMAT, or TOEFL or IELTS? And now with the COVID situation, a lot of these were waived by the universities.
Right.
So is it still advisable for the students to take these tests for the interview's sake, even though they have been waived off and they play no role in their admission?
Now, this is my opinion, right? The consulate doesn't require it. And if the schools don't require it, you don't have to. But if you can go into the interview and show, hey, I took the SAT or the ACT and I got a score that's 95th percentile, right? That's a great piece of evidence to support you, right? Because you've applied for your university. They didn't require this test score. And so maybe the consular officers think, okay, well, it's not as reliable anymore that you've been accepted, that you actually showed your credentials. But if you can bring that to the forefront in your interview and say, yeah, and I got 95th percentile on the SAT, that's definitely going to affect their decision making. Like I said, when you go up there and you're talking to them and they ask you a question, what are you going to do in the US? And you say, study. You have wasted an opportunity. They gave you an opportunity to tell them anything you want, right? Influence their thinking, make them know that you should get the visa, and you just say study. They already know you're studying. They can open up your visa application. They can see you're applying for an F-1. They see that you've got an I-20. They know you're studying. What they basically did was just say, hey, tell me something. Tell me something that makes my job easy. Tell me why I should issue you the visa. And so when you've got this good information, if you've got a scholarship, if you've got, a perfect score on the ACT, if your family is wealthy, right? All of these things are things that are going to help them come to a decision quickly. So when they give you an opportunity to speak, even if your answer doesn't exactly answer their question, or you add on some more information, it's already in their head, right? They can't say, oh no, that wasn't the question I asked, so I'm going to ignore your answer. If you tell them, oh, and I got a perfect score on my SAT, they can't forget that information, right? Even though they didn't ask you, what did you get on your SAT? And it's going to influence them positively to issue your visa.
Understood. And thank you for that. So in the last few years, there have been a lot of programs that have come up, especially, and I've known some of these programs in India, where universities of two countries collaborate and come up with a new course or a degree, which is, half of that is done in the home country of the student, and half of that is done in the US. And a lot of students, when they've completed their year, that's when, or about to complete their 1 year, that's when they start applying for, their F-1 visas. Does the consular officers look at these differently, or are they considered in the same category as maybe a normal program in the US university?
They're going to look at it pretty much in the exact same way. It's good if you can show that you've been studying, right? That's always a good piece of information. If you're thinking about getting into one of these programs, or if you're already in one, I would ask the program, have the other students that have applied with our program, have they been getting issued their visas? Have they gotten their visas refused? To know, if there's a trend. They do, they keep track of bigger programs by name in the consulates. And so if there's a trend of people participating in a certain program, then they go to the US and then they never return to to India, for example, like the one that you just the example you just gave, then the consulate, there's a chance if they're doing their job diligently, they'll notice, okay, there's a trend with this university's program. If people are applying, 40% of them have not returned to India, and then it's going to cause a problem for all the other students. So you want to, you can check on that and find out if the program that you're applying to might have caused a red flag for the consulate.
Got it. Thank you for that tip.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So another question that came up, and I think I've seen a few of them here in the questions tab, was there are a number of students who go with their spouses as well as dependent, and or at least are considering to take their spouse for for their education as well. Is that like an has that to be does that have to be treated differently, or can that be covered in the same purview of a normal F-1 visa interview?
It is. It's not always the same thing. Sometimes an officer will think, for instance, if one partner has already applied for their visa and they got their visa, and then the other partner goes in and applies for the F2 later, sometimes the visa officers will think, oh, look what they're doing. One got their visa and they're going to the US, and now the other one's going to get their visa and go to the US, because their plan all along was for both of them to get to the US and stay there. They're very suspicious. They've kind of got a mentality that, everyone that's coming in might be lying to them, might be trying to trick them. And it's because, a small percentage of people are lying to them, but then that means that they're suspicious about everyone that comes in and talks to them. So depending on the circumstances, we might advise that you apply together at the same time. Or if one's already gotten their visa, that how the second one should apply should definitely, they should have a good plan to influence the thinking of the officer, so that they don't go down some mental road of thinking that there's some type of fraud going on.
Understood. So there was a question about, and I think it came from a couple of attendees, that they graduated way back, from their undergrad way back in the early 2000s, and or maybe in the mid 2000s, and now they have considered to do their master's or MBA. So does that have anything to do with the way a visa officer would look at their case, or can that be treated with the right answers?
Yeah, that's what we call a non-traditional student, meaning that your studies were interrupted and you did something else. You worked for a while, and then you're going back to your studies later. It's not a bad thing, but what it does mean is that the consular officer is going to have more questions. If you're a student that was in high school, from high school went right into undergrad, from undergrad went right into master's, and after master's is applying for a PhD, they think, okay, this is a very natural path that someone's taking. I understand all of it. But if you got your undergrad when you were 22 and now you're 35, 40 years old and you're applying for a master's degree, they're going to think, okay, well, what's going on here? Why are you going back to school? Are you going to be earning money? What's up? It just means they're going to have a lot more questions. And as I've told you, questions that are unanswered in the consular officer's mind are more likely to lead them to a refusal. So when you tell them that you're going to study, giving the one word answer, I'm going to study. I'm going to study a master's, just leaves them with all these questions unanswered still. So the best thing is to get out in front of it, 2 or 3 sentences, and let them know exactly why you're applying for your visa, for a student visa, 20 years after your undergrad, in a way that, makes them understand that it's reasonable, it fits your life plan, it fits your background. You answer all those questions for them up front. Then they don't have any confusion, they don't have any doubts, and then they're more likely to make their way towards an issuance. Got it.
And as a follow-up to this question, I know that we discussed a little bit about the age of the student as well, but does a travel history of an applicant affects the way they would be asked questions, or the way the interview would go? Because some people might have a very extensive travel history and they might have traveled to multiple countries. For some, the US might be the first destination that they're going to. does that affect the chances of an acceptance of or a refusal?
Yes. Everything influences it, but this is one thing that definitely influences it a lot. Like I said, what they're concerned about is that you're going to go to the US and then not return, right? So if you have traveled to other countries, let's say countries where salaries are high, where there's good, social safety net and quality of life and education is very good. So basically a country where you might be able to provide a higher quality of living for your family than you might in your own country. And they see that you've traveled to Australia, you've traveled to the UK, you've traveled to Germany, then they're going to think, oh, well, they had the opportunity to do that if they wanted to in one of these countries, and they did not. That shows me that I can trust that they'll go to the US and do the same thing. If they traveled to England and returned to their country, then I can trust that they're going to travel to the US and also return to their country. It also shows, even if it's not a country like that, if you've traveled around the region to other countries, then it shows, okay, well, this person has, earns a salary, has enough, financial stability to spend money on travel, on tourism, around the region. So it shows that, you and your family have the financial means to be spending money on stuff. So it kind of supports the financial aspect of your application.
Got it. Understood. And on the financial aspect of the application, is self-sponsoring a red flag? Like if someone has enough savings of their own, and if they want to sponsor their own education, would that be a negative thing for a visa officer?
No, it's not a red flag. It's not a red flag. In fact, so sponsoring, there's a big emphasis on sponsoring among the students that I talk to, and I know that there's a field on the DS-160 to fill that out, but in most cases it's people's families, and if it's your family, then we wouldn't say, oh, my sponsor is my father. We would just say, oh, my father's paying for this. My family's paying for this, right? Because that's very natural. When it's someone else who's not associated with the family, then like I said, it raises more questions and you got to figure out why is this happening. But yeah, self-sponsoring is fine. It's not really such a technical thing as saying like, oh, it's myself or my father or my mother or both of them. If it's your family, then it's your family. It's, oh yeah, my family's paying for this. Obviously, if you're a returning student and you're 40 years old and you've had a career where you've earned money and you've saved it and you're paying for your studies, then it's fine to say that you're going to pay for it for yourself. In fact, it makes more sense for someone else to be paying for a 40-year-old's returning studies would actually be a little bit, it would require some explanation because it's not the most natural thing. It's not the most intuitive thing for the visa officers to understand.
Understood. Got it. Well, looks like we're right on the dot. It's 1 minute to, I think, 11:30 Eastern time, and we'll be finishing up with our session right about now. But I would really like to thank you, Ben, for giving us this awesome presentation. I think this has been one of our most engaged webinars so far. I loved the entire time, listening to you and presentation. And I hope everyone who joined us here today enjoyed listening to Ben as well. Well, thank you everybody for joining us here today. Thank you so much, Ben, for taking up the time to speak with our attendees and helping them with the visa interview process. Have a really good day, all of you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.